Good evening, everybody. You're so welcome. Thank you for coming to Series 2 and Episode 2 of Thinking Gay, a program in which we role reverse and try to understand the perspective of those who identify as gay as we consider this topic of banning therapeutic choice. You're very welcome. And once again, it's great to have my colleague, Dr. Laura Haynes. How are you doing, Laura?
Hi, Mike. Great. Thank you. I'm so glad to be with you again. Last week, we reflected on Emily Sargent's piece, Gay Conversion Therapy, My Undercover Investigation in the Times. On Friday last, 6th of August, the Story of Our Times podcast released the first of 7 podcasts presented by Emily Sargent, entitled Thinking Straight, Part 1, Conversion. Check the link and search for the title, Thinking Straight, if you'd like to listen to Emily's presentation. You can also check out our program from Thursday last on the IFTC YouTube channel or the Core Issues Trust website homepage.
And this evening, we're going to be inviting a range of people, professional people who are involved in the whole issue of working with clients who have unwanted feelings and desires and want to work using a therapeutic or counseling approaches to see what can be done about that. We also have a policy researcher who I think has a very clear perspective in terms of the historicity of all of this and what has developed through the years. So we're going to be introducing several people to you this evening. And I think we should begin right away. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming today. It would be great if you could introduce yourselves. I think some are still on their way. Can we start with you, Anne? Give us a minute or so in terms of who you are and what you do.
Thanks, Mike. Yes, I am a psychotherapist. So I treat primarily, adults with complex traumatic stress, usually as a result of childhood sexual abuse or rape or kidnapping, those kind of things. And so I'm kind of in my retirement phase, but lately, the last couple of years, I have actually been more focused on the conversion therapy bans in Canada. And today, actually, our news report is that our Prime Minister is calling an election for September 20th. So that will stir things up again in Canada.
Well, from Canada all the way, thank you so much for being here tonight. And Karis, can you introduce yourself? Say something. Oh, Karis is gone. She'll be back. Libby, it's so good to have you. Tell us who you are and just a flavor in terms of what you do and why all of this might be relevant to you.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So I'm Libby. I'm 24 and I'm a theology student, but I'm also what we would describe as ex-transgender. I believed myself to be transgender for over a decade and actually transitioned and lived as a trans man for about 6 or 7 years in total. And I've left that lifestyle now. And my experience is just about having experienced what the type of therapy that the NHS offers to young people when they believe that they're transgender, and also having experienced what X Out Loud and Core Issues Trust have to offer.
It's so good to have you, Libby. And heads up, folks, there's soon to be a book release called X Out Loud, Emerging Former LGBT Voices. Libby's been very much involved in that. And if you want to see before and after in terms of Libby's story, get the book. It's a really great story that she presents in there. So let's move on. Karis will be back, I'm sure, as soon as she can. And we'll introduce her at that point. But Laura, take us on.
Well,
What's
let's
next?
not forget Acts Out Loud director Matthew Greck, who can't be with us tonight, but sent this message. Take a look.
Hi there, this is Matthew Greck, and it's my pleasure to comment on the first episode of Thinking Straight by Emily Sargent. I heard and I listened to the full episode, and I am aware that Emily quoted me when I was celebrating the fact that God is raising an army of men and women leaving LGBT, and I still stand by those words big time. I think it's wonderful that we are seeing such a group of believers all across the world who are very happy to explore change in their sexuality, very happy to stand by their values and beliefs. And I think it's really worth supporting and celebrating their lives. And I was also talking about how X Out Loud had interviewed just over 29 testimonies of people leaving LGBT. What an honor and what a privilege that we have come this far, and more to come. So yeah, I think it was really strange when Emily was talking about an extremely secretive practice such as so-called conversion therapy. I thought, what is she talking about? Because Courageous Trust has been doing so much public work and advocacy. We have our own episodes that Emily herself referred to. So I could not understand why she's making it sound like this stuff is happening in the dark where nobody sees it. It's just not that at all. If you go on the Courageous Trust YouTube page, you'll see some of Mike's work and his teaching on counseling, which I highly recommend that people would observe. So that was strange, and I thought it was so unethical and potentially illegal that she even aired Carol's words from the session itself. I mean, where is the integrity in that? I find it so bizarre. I don't do that to people because I respect the confidentiality of our conversations. So I think, Emily Sargent just showed who she really is by airing Carol's comments, to be honest. That's my opinion. She made it sound like the fight for equality will be over once conversion therapy has been banned. Actually, equality will never be achieved if a minority is given supreme status over another minority. I think that's self-destructive. So yeah, that's not true. I noticed that Jane Ozanne really aimed at the gifts of the Holy Spirit, exorcism, prayer, and fasting. These are sacred Christian disciplines, and she was trying to mock these practices. And I did not appreciate that. I did not appreciate her tone. And she also said that the majority of conversion therapy in Britain is taking place in religious contexts. She's making it sound like it's the church's fault that this is happening, that this narrative is being promoted, etc. But it's clear that she's attacking the church. She seriously has a problem with the spirit-filled church that is operating in the power of the Holy Spirit. And that's really not friendly to thousands of Christians in the UK and in the world. So that is very bizarre. It was also said that homosexuality and heterosexuality are not conscious choices. I disagree with that because we know that we might not choose what we feel, but we have choices around our sexuality, our sexual feelings actually. And so, I of course don't find that to be true. And that presupposes that homosexuality and heterosexuality are all about feelings. Whereas we deny that because for us it's about practice. It's about what we do with our bodies and how we treat our bodies. So yeah, that's something else I noticed. And then this study from the Ozen Foundation was mentioned. 450 people who had gone through so-called conversion therapy, 3% were happy. Really. I believe that is so not a random sample. It doesn't sound like a random sample to me. And it sounds to me like a very, very biased, planned survey and study. So yeah, that's not to be trusted. The thing is, studies and research is used by the LGBT lobby to promote their own agenda, their own narrative, and people should seriously look into the way this research and these studies are being conducted.
Well, thank you, Matthew, for kicking us off. We're going to have a detailed conversation about all of that in a few minutes, and it's very good to hear from Matthew, one of the people, of course, who Emily Sargent recorded or played an extract of. If you've just tuned in, what are we doing here? Well, we're reviewing episode 1 of Thinking Straight Conversion, which is a podcast that was put out by the Times, the Sunday Times, and the Sunday Magazine last Friday. You'll see episode 2 tomorrow. And during this time, we just want to review this a little. But before we continue, Karis is here. Karis, introduce yourself and just give us a flavor of what you do and what makes you passionate in terms of the work that you do. And then a little bit later, we'll continue with our discussion about the issue at hand.
I'm a public policy analyst for Christian Concern, and one of the things that I do is look at all the policy area of banning conversion therapy. I'm also on the executive board and research board of IFTCC, and so obviously that's highly relevant. I should say I was surprised. I've been surprised over the last 3 years how broad this area of policy has become. When I first wrote about it, I knew the issues around the mental health, and I covered the banning of Voices of the Silenced film, the documentary. But since then, looking at the various things like the Memorandum of Understanding and so on, I've been really struck by how it's an everyman issue. It touches on all sorts of aspects of human life. And it would affect people who aren't identifying as LGBT. It would affect their families, children, marriage, teaching, social work, religious freedom, free speech, all sorts of issues. And they're very broad, a bit like pro-life issues. And that's what motivates me, is the breadth of it and the fact that when you can see further, you realize that this is not just a minority issue. Yes.
Great. Thank you, Karis. It's really important that this is not just something that affects a very small percentage of the population. This affects the grandmothers, the grandfathers, the adults, parents, children, everybody in the land is going to be affected by this. So I think it's a really important topic. But now, folks, I'm going to just change the focus for a few minutes here this evening. Some of you will know that every week we have been looking at the whole issue of evidence and ideology and how we work with evidence and what the role of ideology is. And over the last couple of weeks, we've been looking at the Vesuvian towns, 2 of them, Pompeii and Herculaneum, 2 cities that were covered in AD 79 by volcanic ash and all the rest of it that came out of Mount Vesuvius. And what's interesting is this question of whether or not the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ actually reached these towns before the eruption took place. Some say yes, and some people say no. We have to look at the evidence and try to make a decision. We've seen all sorts of things. We saw the cross in the bakery that is disputed. We saw the cross in the house of the bicentenary, in the city of Herculaneum. Some people saw it as a Christian artifact from the first centuries. Other people deny it. There's different things. But today, we want to look at something else that many people have felt was an important Christian artifact. And I'm talking about the Rotus or the Sator square. These are kind of mind games, I guess, from the first century. And some people see in this a Christian message. Now, what I'm interested in is to know how we evaluate, how we work through different points of view and eventually arrive at a point of view that we can hold to intelligently, because we've not just accepted somebody's point of view, or we've not just, made a connection with what some authority has said, but we've read as much as we can, we've looked as far as we can, and then we're able to make a decision that works for us. Have a look at this video. It seems to me that with the very clear evidence of Christian establishment and development of a mature church in Rome by AD 57, together with the arrival in Italy of the Apostle Paul and his obvious celebration among fellow believers in AD 60, that we're not wrong in pursuing evidence of Jesus' devotion in the nearby port town of Pompeii. We've looked at the cross in the baker's shop of the Ariana Poliana, together with the 19 equilateral street crosses, and we've checked out the story of the cross found in the house of the bicentenary in Herculaneum. But I'm back now in Pompeii, heading towards the Palestra, opposite the amphitheatre in Pompeii. I'm meeting archaeologist Paolo Gardelli again, and also another person, Dr. Peter May, someone who has taken an interest in the famous Rotus or Sator square, which many believe to be yet another evidence of Christian or Jewish influence in the town. And here we are now at the Palestra. There's something important I'm beginning to realize about the nature of the evidence for Jesus' devotion or a Jewish presence in these towns that we need to recognize. I think I'm correct in saying that on their own, it would be difficult for any of these artifacts to stand as proof of Jesus' devotion or of religious Jews being present. What counts is how they relate to one another, or in other words, whether or not there is any degree of triangulation evident relating to these artifacts. Now, the fact is that when dealing with the Rotus or Sator square, scholarly opinion about this is diverse. Some see Christian, others Jewish, and still others Mithraic origins of the Rota Sator square. If you didn't know, Mithraism spread throughout much of the Roman Empire in the first century, focusing on the god Mithras, inspired by Zoroastrianism. It was popular in the Roman army and was an early rival of Christianity.
The Rota Square is a palindrome, which is a puzzle of 5 Latin words in this case, that can be read from left to right, but from right to left, and from top to bottom, and from bottom to top. And so these 5 words have been a puzzle to many people for a long time, and they haven't been able to crack it. There doesn't seem to be a simple solution, and yet they're found all over Europe and in further parts of the world, in Ethiopia and in England. But the oldest was found here. Now, the only solution that has been put forward to explain this palindrome is that the letters represent Pater Noster, our Father, but because of the square, in the center of the square, there's only one letter N. So N becomes pivotal, and therefore the Pater Noster can be written twice only if it's written as a cross. But the reality is that 2 of them have been found here in Pompeii, one of them in the Palestra behind me. what makes it controversial is that there are scholars who say that Christianity had not reached Pompeii before the eruption of Vesuvius, and this would be very clear evidence that it had. There is a leftover alpha and omega in the puzzle, and there are 2 extra A's and 2 extra O's. And the argument has been that this didn't exist, the significance of alpha and omega, until the book of Revelation was written. But there's no reason to suppose that Jesus wasn't seen as the beginning and the end. We know that that idea occurs in the book of Revelation. The Rota square indicates that it also would have been in Christian thinking earlier than that. Some people have argued that the Rota square was written after the discovery of the ruins and was an addition later. But being found in 2 places and being submerged in the volcanic ash, that view doesn't seem credible, that it is generally believed this square was there and unearthed when the treasures of Pompeii were unearthed. It could be Jewish in origin, except that the idea of God being our Father is a very minor theme in Judaism and a very major theme in Christianity. In the Gospels itself, God is referred to as Father over 150 times, and in the New Testament as a whole over 250 times. So this was a major idea. The other thing that's fascinating is that the second line of the Lord's Prayer, "Hallowed be thy name," focuses attention on the letter N for nomen. That in the center of the square and at the pivot of the cross draws attention to the second line of the Lord's Prayer, "Hallowed be thy name." The Christians claim that the name was the name above every name, that it's at the name of Jesus that every knee should bow and every tongue confess that he is Lord. And so the name for God was greatly elevated by the Christians and seen as the name of Jesus. There have been concerns that the Alpha and Omega originated in the book of Revelation and wasn't known earlier. But if the Rota square is as it seems to be, then clearly the idea of Alpha and Omega predated the book of Revelation.
There are several other inscriptions that may well be indicative of not only a Christian presence, but also of a Jewish presence in the town. All of them attract both those who affirm, but also those who reject any claim of Jewish or Christian presence. It really points out the need to carefully review and then to analyze all of the material on a case-by-case basis. We know about the manufacture of kosher garum serving a Jewish community, but there have been other inscriptions like the words Sodom and Gomorrah, also the inscription Poinim Kerem, which seems to in some cases mean utter destruction and seems to point to a judgment as revealed in the Hebrew scriptures. We also know about the word Christianus, which is a transliteration found close to the lupinarium. The importance, of course, of all of this is that there must have been a dispersal of some 20,000 Jews who were taken into captivity after the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. We don't know where they went, but at least one publication has spoken about their presence in multiple cities in this region. So I don't think it's beyond all reason to speculate that they would have been here. And if the Jews were here, presumably there may well have been some Christians among them. Clearly, there was some kind of presence here. We don't know much about it. Pompeii is only 50 kilometers or so from Pozzuoli, where Acts chapter 28 records the Apostle Paul landed and stayed for a week with a group of Christians before he went on to the city of Rome. I think it just provides a fascinating place where you can begin to feel what it must have been like in a town in this region at the time. So what do you think, folks? Don't you find that interesting that in all of those 5 lines, the same word that can be read from top to bottom and bottom to top and from left to right, there's one N, which in the Latin stands for nomen or name. And when you unscramble it all, it reads in the shape of a cross, Paternoster, our Father. Now, for some people, that is conclusive evidence that this is a Christian artifact, and that this game that was common among the Roman army is something to do with the emerging Christian ethos that was beginning to develop in the world. But then you pick up other monographs, such as the one I'm looking at by Mola, and he writes about the Mithraic origin and meaning of the Rota square. So you may be saying, well, so what, and who cares? But what we're doing here, folks, is assessing evidence and learning how important it is to be very careful before we dismiss things. It's really important to know what exactly it is that we are looking at, and then to read as widely as possible to understand how things fit together, the pros and cons. In other words, we have to test our ideology by the evidence that we experience. It's as though we all have to come and we have to put before scientific method those things that are close to our heart, so that we can understand the truth and not be deceived and misled by our own belief systems and the prejudices that I'm afraid we probably all have when it comes to different worldviews and perspectives. So, just a thought. Check us out next week and we'll continue this study. So, folks, it's great to have everybody back. And I've got something that I would like to ask, but I think I must step back. And Laura, do you want to get us going? What do you think about what Emily said in the podcast?
Well, an underlying foundation for what she said was that same-sex attraction, and I presume she didn't necessarily say this, but by implication also transgender identity or incongruent gender identity, are simply biologically determined. She certainly had her quoted her expert who said that same-sex sexuality is biologically determined and not a choice. Well, I would agree that people don't choose to have same-sex feelings and just choose them away, just like that, a snap of a finger. Otherwise, we wouldn't be offering them assistance. But I do disagree with her about same-sex sexuality being simply biologically determined. Even the American Psychological Association, in its APA Handbook of Sexuality and Psychology, says same-sex sexuality and gender incongruent identity are not simply biologically determined. It says that same-sex sexuality has childhood sexual abuse has associative and potentially causal links to having same-sex partners based on research that includes a 30-year study of documented cases of childhood sexual abuse. The APA Handbook praised the rigor of this study and drew its conclusion based on research evidence. So there are psychological causes. In fact, the handbook says there are psychoanalytic causes that may work as or stand as main effects. That means standalone causes all by themselves or in interaction with biological influences. It also entertains the possibility that there are psychological causes, including pathological causes, for gender incongruent identity, and says that it is likely a mixture of causes. In fact, there is international research that one study in Finland of all the adolescents who were applicants over a 2-year period for sexual reassignment services. Now, 75% had high rates of psychiatric disorders, and the study said that these were usually pre-existed the thoughts about gender. It was rare that they were secondary to thoughts about gender. It also said that bullying and high rates preceded thoughts about gender. 92% of these adolescents, and in most cases 75% these were not about gender presentation. And the bullying was great. So these are other causes of same-sex sexuality that would reasonably call for therapy, and that if treated may lead to a decrease in same-sex attraction or behavior or transgender identity. There's also a study
Laura,
quickly in the United States that says it's very strong, says the same thing.
we're going to come back to you, but I just want
All
to
right.
point out something. You can see Laura's gift, can't you? You can see that Laura actually is a deep sea diver. Some of us are windsurfers and we stay on top of the wave and we look at the things broadly. But Laura is definitely a deep sea diver, and we do need the deep sea diving, and we'll be coming back to that. But I want to ask a question, and I'd love to hear from Libby and from Karis if she's there, as to some of the things that Emily said. For example, when talking about conversion therapy, Emily said it's taking place in many different forms right across the UK. What do you think, folks? Did you hear that, Karis? Is conversion therapy happening in many forms and happening right across the UK? What do you make of that statement? Anybody? Karis, you'll have to unmute. Okay, we'll come back to Karis. How about you, Libby? What do you make of this? Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, actually, I was really interested by, I think the majority of the podcast seemed to focus a lot on these far-reaching methods of conversion therapy, these sort of, it's all across the country. And I actually calculated only about 7 minutes actually focused on therapeutic choice and core issues trust. And I was really astounded by the focus that was given and the conflation between these negative spiritual practices, these negative therapeutic practices, these abuses, basically, you know, hitting people over the head with Bibles, electric shock therapy, corrective rape, things that, as she mentioned herself, I think she actually said, what's the quote? It was something like, this is not just limited to sexual orientation and gender identity. And that's absolutely true. As somebody myself who's actually been through spiritual abuse and maladaptive spiritual attempts at things like exorcism, which, like as Matthew said, as Christians, we believe that there are good and evil spirits, and demonic possession is a serious and negative thing. It's not the same when somebody looks at a person and says, "Be gone, the devil," when the Holy Spirit's not told them that the devil is in that person, for example. And those things, they're not LGBT issues. I don't understand the conflation there. That's the thing that upsets me. Those are abhorrent practices, but people who attempt these spiritually abusive practices, they're not just trying to cast the gay out of people. They're trying to cast the anxiety out of people. They're trying to cast the confusion or the sexual promiscuity, even heterosexual sexual promiscuity, out of people. It has nothing to do with LGBT in particular. So I don't understand what the link is between these abhorrent practices and then zoning into the LGBT community and then broadening then to apply it to therapeutic choice and core issues trust. It feels like a logical fallacy to me.
So, Libby, just to clarify, and I'm really hoping to come to Karis in a minute. I think what you're saying, you're recognizing that there is such a thing as legitimate spirituality and deliverance work, that we can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, but you're also acknowledging that there can be extremes. And you've spoken about some of the things that you've gone through. And you're pointing out that there is, I don't know, like a non sequitur in terms of the relationship between all of this and the work that therapists and ministries such as ours are doing. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Great.
In fact, I would go fast to say that core issues trust and practices like that are something that can help people to stay away from those abusive spiritual practices. It's a support group more than anything for X Out Loud for me.
Great. Karis, have we got you yet?
Yes.
Go ahead.
I think what was said about, well, it's happening all over the place, shows that she can't be bothered to deal with the problem of the definition of conversion therapy, which is something we've dealt with extensively, written about publicly. And I think that's a real problem for a journalist. A journalist should be investigating properly the history of a definition, why it's come about. Is it actually used? The term isn't used mostly by professionals. It's certainly not used in churches. It's arbitrarily imposed. And I think then the question is not just about her, but about the editors who allowed this podcast series to go ahead with that term.
Good point.
I think those are major problems by now with all the journalism, or what passes as journalism, on this issue, is that it's actually propaganda. And it calls into question the independence of the press. And an outfit like the Times like to think of itself as independent of the government of the United Kingdom, of the state, but it's not clear that it is. It's actually doing the government's bidding at this point.
Karis, that's a major point. And can we just stay with this, folks, for a bit longer? Anne in Canada and also Laura in the USA. I know claims have been made about literally hundreds of thousands of people experiencing gay conversion therapy. What do you think is behind this? What are they trying to say when they talk about these huge numbers? Have you any perspective, Anne? Okay.
Sorry, Mike, I'm having a lot of trouble with my internet provider.
No
Sorry.
problem.
I hope you can hear me.
Okay, did you hear what I asked you?
Not really.
Okay, just let me recap. So we keep hearing that, I think in one case, 700,000 people may have been exposed to conversion therapy in various countries. I know it's been said of the USA, it's now being said of the UK. All of a sudden, everybody's been exposed to this terrible practice. What is happening there? Why are they doing this? Do you have a perspective?
Yeah, I do. I think, for instance, the word may does not mean that it is an absolute. Language is really, really important. The other thing is the pooling of LGBTQ individuals from a certain strata of society, which is usually they're found for the studies in Canada, for sure, at gay bars and different homosexual and where people go to meet people, and these people for sure are not interested in leaving, particularly an LGBT persona. They perhaps have been from the churches, which I think a lot of them have been, but the numbers they're saying just don't line up, and I don't think that there is the research out there to actually support the claims.
Okay, Anne, what about you, Laura? What do you say?
Counseling is. So it could be anything from Aunt Susie encouraged a child to wait till they're 18 to become sexually active, whether it's in their same-sex sexuality or whatever, or to wait till 18 to alter their body, give it some more time to think about it. It could be a physician who did an evaluation for whether this is appropriate for this person, that was seen as trying to discourage them, or a physician or a therapist who told them the harms, the potential, the pros and cons, so they would be aware of the effects, the potential harmful effects on their health of intervening in their endocrine systems and reproductive systems and on a permanent basis. So these could be viewed as attempts at conversion therapy to change someone. Really, if someone went to a pastor and asked for prayer, and the pastor said one prayer with them, that could be counted. Anything really at all. And by a group being surveyed who understand the political purpose of the survey is to demonstrate that this is harmful, because they really just want to push an ideology. They don't want anyone to think. There are some people who don't find LGBT identity and experiences fulfilling. They tried it, they didn't find it fulfilling. There are people who want to save their marriage and family to the people they love, people who want to live by the faith they love, and so on.
Okay, Laura, very good points there. David Pickup, it's so good to see you. Thank you so much for coming. David, just give us a sentence or two to contextualize things. Tell us who you are and what you do.
I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist and supervisor, and my private practice is in Houston, Texas. My private practice is exclusively dealing with gender dysphoria, and primarily boys and men who are dealing with unwanted homosexual feelings. And I also train therapists now. That's new.
That's wonderful. So a supervisor, a trainer, and a practitioner. That's a lot of experience that David is bringing. David, if you didn't hear the question, what we picked up on is the fact that LGBT folks are telling us. One report I read was that 700,000 people have been exposed to conversion therapy. What is this all about? Do you have a perspective? What's the goal here? Why are they saying that? And what are they trying to achieve, would you say?
Their research is faulty. If you'll just simply ask anyone who did it how they did their research, you'll realize that they cherry pick and they mislabel. They don't understand what real therapy is. They most likely they've considered anyone who gets a talking to by a pastor as conversion therapy. And there's a certain viewpoint that says, okay, I can kind of see that. But that, of course, is done so that they can persuade the entire world that massive amounts of people have undergone psychotherapy for change, attempt their sexuality or gender, that's leading to suicide and depression and anxiety, and they want nothing more, in my opinion, to convince the world that they have to be right in everything they believe about LGBT ideology. They cannot tolerate, for political reasons, I believe it's ultimately because of cognitive dissonance, that they can't tolerate an opposite viewpoint because their own foundation of their being will be taken out. And so they just can't handle that from an emotional standpoint. Unfortunately, that makes them rather bigoted, even if it's unconscious. It makes their viewpoint very myopic, and their viewpoint then ends up being careless of what other people have experienced, of real change, real growth in people of faith cases, in real increase of faith and strength in who they truly are. They cannot face that. And so it forces them to try to force the world to believe exactly what they believe. And as such, it becomes very dangerous.
So, Karis, Anne, Laura, and Libby, question to all of you. Am I correct when I say that I think what we are experiencing here is LGBT activists who are wanting to say whoever disagrees with this notion that people can move away from homosexuality, in other words, anybody who resists the normalization of homosexuality, in fact, is being labeled as a conversion therapist. It's a very broad net that is being spread to catch as many criminals in the net. Do you think that's reasonable?
I think so. I think when we, if we look at the wording of the law in Malta that was passed in 2016, it doesn't use the term conversion therapy, it uses the term conversion practices.
Okay.
And that is recommended in some different jurisdictions, and it would have come from ILGA, from the global LGBT umbrella group. But I think we can make a comparison with the term gay affirmative therapy, which has been around since the 1980s.
Mm-hmm.
But by the late 1990s and early 2000s, you had the term gay affirmative practices, and that was coming into social work with young people. And yet they were obviously very closely linked, because social work and mental health are always going to be closely linked. So I think we should always be looking out for this in whichever jurisdiction whether it's a private member's bill by an opposition politician or whether it's a government-sponsored bill. We should be looking at this. And I think the other thing that joins all these things together, which we never really discuss, is queer theory, which is this kind of pseudo-academic philosophy that normalizes all of this, developed by people like Judith Butler and so on in the 1990s. When you actually look at the text of academic defenses of LGBT affirmative therapy, from Britain even, where people pride themselves on being more empirical and less theory-laden, generally across the humanities and social sciences, especially in England. In reality, what you've got is underneath is queer theory.
Okay, so queer theory, we need to sometime, I think, visit that. I'm just going to shift gears slightly here. Here's another question I want to ask you. I don't know if you picked it up, but Emily herself said that things like corrective rape are already illegal in England, and that some of the more extreme practices no longer take place. And some, like Professor Michael King, referred to aversion therapy and electroshock approaches that are no longer used. But then Emily kind of comes in to make her point, and she says this, actually talking about core issues trust. And I don't know if you remember, she refers to a series that Core Issues Trust did where we looked closely at the therapeutic methods. And the whole purpose of doing that was to be more transparent and to let people in to the counseling room so that they could see what we do. And she said, actually referring to me, that I look harmless until I open my mouth and you hear what I'm saying, something like that. But here's my question. This is what Emily says. She says that it is, now where is it? She says it's underground, it's subtle, and it's insidious. And it seemed to me that those are the reasons why Emily rationalizes that she has to go underground.
Yes, I think
because of all this.
It's to justify her deception and to project motives
Okay.
Negative motives onto people she disagrees with. That we are secretive and we are deceptive.
Okay, so here we are, folks, secretively broadcasting on YouTube and Facebook and pretty well wherever we can get into, that's what we're doing, because we want debate and we want to be able to have a conversation. You know something, folks, that what strikes me is that Emily's not here, unfortunately, and Dr. Michael King is not here, and Jane Ozanne, sadly, is not here. So I wonder, before we continue, if we shouldn't just give them an opportunity to speak their mind. And to do that, I'm going to ask us to just take a minute to meet Jane Ozanne and listen to what she said, and then we can continue with our discussion.
We're about to meet a man who describes himself as ex-gay and says he knows how to make gay people go straight. He himself underwent counselling for homosexuality and has been married for nearly 40 years. Jane, let's start with you. You're not that man, obviously. But how do you feel about this type of so-called therapy to change gay people to straight people?
I think it's incredibly dangerous, Stephen, and I know that myself. That's part of my own testimony, but I also know that because that's research that I've been doing with a very influential board to go out and talk to people who've been through conversion therapy. And you know, the level of attempted suicide, the level of suicidal thoughts, of anxiety, depression amongst those who've tried to change their sexuality is astronomically high.
And you've been through it.
I have too. It landed me in hospital twice, fighting for my life and my body really screaming. And I must admit, I'm really concerned about us having even this debate on television, where people in a world where they like to be straight, I can imagine in Northern Ireland, luckily I don't live here, but wanting to try and fit in, wanting to try and be what I believe is godly, and yet knowing that what I'm putting myself through will cost me ultimately my sanity in many cases of my life.
So, Dr. Mike Davidson, how do you change someone from being straight to being gay, from being gay to being straight? How does that work?
Well, I wouldn't know, Stephen, because that's not what we do. What we do is explore sexual fluidity. We believe that people have the right and the freedom to choose the direction that they want to go in. And if it's true what the scientists are telling us, that sexuality is fluid, then we should take them seriously.
Do you think people can choose?
I didn't choose the feelings I had, but I had choices around those feelings.
But you're saying it's fluid. So you think, like, could you get up tomorrow morning and decide to be gay?
There was a point in my life when I decided I wanted to go in a different direction.
But you can't.
And that's, well, I did.
But no, but Stephen, sorry, Mike, you cannot change your innate desire. All the science, you've just quoted science, all the scientists, all the academics, all the medical profession will say that you cannot change your innate desire. You might be able to try and change your behaviour, which is lying to yourself.
How does it work?
No, it is true. It's completely true.
So how does it actually, how do you change who you fancy?
First, I need to say that the APA in the 2014 document...
No, you tell me. Don't quote them. Yeah. You tell me. How do you change who you're attracted to?
You listen to the scientific views that tell us that there is always psychological conditions around this issue that need to be visited. Number one.
Around what issue?
Around the issue of unwanted attractions to the same sex for some people.
And that's the key thing. You see, there is a level of homophobia, internalized homophobia, which means they cannot accept who God has created them to be. And that's because of culture, that's because of religious teaching. And that is what drives so many people to a point, Mike, where they come and try and find you. I've been talking today to people who've been through your prayer ministry and have tried to commit suicide at the end of it.
Really?
Because, yes, I have. Because ultimately they are put in such a difficult place where they know the prayer's not working, where they feel ashamed, where they feel that God is not answering their prayers, where they feel so disembodied.
Okay, I'm going to come into the audience and see what we think straight away. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, but this makes me absolutely fuming. If you're gay, you're gay. You're straight, you're straight. Why should you have to change?
Yeah.
Why can't you just love whoever the blooming hell you want? It's an absolute joke.
You shouldn't have to change, but you should have the freedom to
No,
choose
but people
the
like yourself
direction that
who
you
are
want to go.
Christians say that you should. That is a joke. I'm sorry.
But if
You should
try
not- you should
and
be able to
change-
love
But
whoever you
what
want.
he's saying is he's not forcing it upon anyone, but he's saying if someone does not want to be gay, then he will
It's not a
try
choice,
to help
though.
them.
You're born now with that. You're born to be
But
gay.
I-
You're
Well,
born
the
to
science
sin.
disagrees with you. And
that's
by the way, so
untrue.
does Peter Tatchell, so does
No,
Julie
Mike.
Bindle.
No, Peter
I
Tatchell
myself-
doesn't.
Mike,
Oh, he
I'm
does.
bisexual.
No, he
Does that
doesn't,
mean that
and
I
he's
choose
also
that?
not here.
I was born this
Hold
way.
on,
little bit
hold
like the
on,
Hunger
hold on,
Games,
hold
isn't it?
on. I need to come into the audience. Go ahead. Well, we're very being to you. We'll come to the front here. Go ahead, yeah.
I'm going to say to Mike, it's an unchristian message that he is bringing. God creates us all in his own image and likeness. He creates us to look like him and be like him. And trying to change the desires, trying to change people into something that God has not intended for them is dangerous, and it is a terrible message to give young people, old people, and anybody who is either Christian or non-Christian.
Okay, you
that
can
we
respond to
have
that, Mike.
Nobody tried to change me. I went out of my own volition
But
to
you tried to change
engage.
other people.
Hold
You tried
on. No, he's got to be able to.
support
He's got to be able to
change.
speak.
to engage with professionals who took me seriously and supported me in my own personal search.
Why
That
didn't
doesn't
you-
mean that they didn't challenge me. They challenged me, but they gave me that freedom, and that is what is being denied.
Why
in
didn't
Great
you
Britain
want to
today.
be? Why didn't you want to fancy men?
Because I was married, and because there was something within me that taught me that that was not the direction that I wanted to go in. I think that's perfectly reasonable.
I know you
it's
believe
not
that,
what I
Mike.
would put.
Okay, I'm going to go to the young fella here in the
Can I
glasses. You
just
can in
share?
1 second. Go ahead.
Thank you.
You're bringing in the argument of Christianity and teaching that way, but the Bible specifically states, Leviticus 18, you shall not lie with a man the way you lie with a woman. So there's no way that you can turn around to the doctor and say he's wrong for deciding this. If you have a Christian belief in that, therefore he has every right to do that.
No, we can have a
Thank you.
really...
So can you choose to get up tomorrow morning and be gay or straight or fancy that camera? Like, can you choose who you're going to fancy?
You should have.
Could you fancy me tomorrow morning? And
I
the guy
wouldn't,
beside you
but-
tomorrow night? And the person to your right the next night? Could you do that?
As a Christian, I believe that gay marriage and gay relationships are wrong because I believe in the Bible specifically
It's
what
not my
I've just
question.
said.
I'm not asking
so
you about a
therefore,
religious
I'm going to
belief.
turn. But no, I'm
But
answering
I'm
your
not
question.
asking you, hold on. I am not asking you about a religious belief, okay? I'm asking you, could you as a human being get up tomorrow morning and decide you're going to change your sexuality?
You could, because apparently it's
You could.
2019. I couldn't.
Why
Because
not?
my morals say I can't.
No, I'm not talking about morals. I'm talking about...
Then what are we talking about
And
here?
here's
We're
what I'm
talking about his morals and saying he
I'm
got
not,
up and said,
I'm not.
I don't want to have
I'm
this.
talking about, do you think the human being... I'm not talking about religion or morals. I'm asking you, do you think you could decide to change the chemistry in your brain, your sexuality? Could you do it?
No.
So how could a gay person?
That's a decision inside themselves.
Right, so you're not deciding to be straight, but a gay person's deciding to be gay. Is that right?
No,
I am
that's not
saying
what we're
that
saying,
they should
Stephen.
have the issue. They should be allowed to rightfully have this therapy if they so wish.
Stephen,
we
can I
shouldn't take
come in?
that chance away from them because then
I
they're
really
limiting their
understand
rights.
that point of view because that is exactly how I lived for about 40 years. And I wanted to be straight. I tried everything in the book. I really thought, because the world I lived in, the bubble I lived in, taught me it's so, like you've just said, that there are 6 Bible verses out of 31,000 supposedly said that God didn't love gay people and I needed to be straight. Now, that put me in hospital, and I chose voluntarily to go through all that, but
Okay.
I did myself great damage, and I know that God loves me just the way I
Well-
am, and I believe that the Bible is extremely clear
I want to speak to
about
Colin.
this.
Colin, evening to you.
Evening, Stephen.
Colin, you're gay, you're a Christian, and you've decided never to have sex in your life again.
Yes.
What a shame.
Why?
Because all my life I have struggled with this issue and I've not been able to square the two. I've tried to compromise, I've tried to lead both lives, and I've not been able to. And I know my Bible, and it does say it's
God
wrong.
loves you.
Hold on. Let him speak.
Now, as for therapy, that's a different issue because I haven't been able to change. But if somebody wanted to change, I think they should have the freedom if they so choose. I don't think they should be forced, but I do think they should be allowed. Somebody emailed me a couple of days ago from the United States, of all places, who'd seen a letter of mine about this subject in the newsletter. Don't ask me how people in America can read the newsletter.
Why don't you want to be yourself and everything that entails?
Well, I'll get to that in a minute, but this gentleman
We've only got 2 minutes and we're done.
This gentleman wasn't a Christian, and he had gone through the full process of leaving the gay lifestyle, married with children. And I found that interesting that it wasn't the...
But let me talk about you.
Yes.
Are you not sad that you'll not be able to be in a relationship with someone ever in your entire life who you feel attracted to? Why would you deny yourself that?
It is a sacrifice. It's something I have chosen to do. It's not an easy path for me or anybody else, and there are many like me within the church who are probably not as open as I am now.
But even if you're not acting it out,
yes,
everybody has fantasy.
yeah,
So you must be fantasizing about men.
yes, same as a man would fantasize about a woman.
Yeah.
There's no difference in the lust or the desire, but because I know the Bible says it's wrong, I don't practice it.
Michael?
Stephen, the reality of it is, medical opinion is against conversion therapy. GPs, psychologists, psychotherapists, NHS, England, Scotland, they're all against
Church
it,
of
okay?
England.
And there's no, the damage it does is immense. There's journals that have written about it. I would also be thinking more about the vulnerable teenagers who are insecure, they're trying to fit in society, and then you have organisations like yours which go around trying to promote this idea of trying to change somebody's sexuality. You're disgraceful. It is absolutely wrong. Think of the vulnerable teenagers. Think of the people who live in rural areas. They're struggling, and your organisation is really not helping. And I'm going to do everything I can to get conversion therapy banned in this country.
So you are prepared to take away the freedoms and
I'm
rights
prepared to
of
ban it, yes.
minority groups who
Yes.
don't agree with you.
Protect people who are
Hold
trying
on, no,
to...
no.
Here's
He's
the
got to be able to speak.
difference. Here's the difference.
Why has he got to speak?
You are prepared to do that, but we are not saying that gay people should not be celebrated and
Medical
free
opinions on my
to
side,
live
it's against
in...
you. Medical opinions on my side, GPs are on my side, they're against you.
But
It's absolutely true. The
Exactly.
medical world
Exactly.
has
They're against
sold
you. They're on
out
my side.
to an ideology
okay.
that is slowly but surely crippling the society and taking it towards pansexuality and total sexual
God, that's
anarchy
so
in this
untrue.
country.
Look,
Medical
God
opinion is against it.
created
That's the
us-
end of it.
Hold on.
It's true.
It's not
friends.
true, Mike. And you know it's not. And the difficulty here is that it's like a Hunger Games. If I can just
I'm
say
afraid
this.
we're out of time. I'm afraid
It's
we're out of
just
time.
like the Hunger Games. There are people dying at home.
We can talk about this tomorrow morning on the radio. We can continue it on the radio.
Well, we weren't allowed to talk any further about that on the radio. And just by the way, the two people that Jane referred to as having gone through our prayer ministry, whatever that is, turned out not to have been clients of ours at all. So I'm afraid that was misrepresented. But folks, I wanted to give Jane the opportunity to speak clearly as Jane. So we're not just talking about us and them. Anybody have anything they want to pick up on this whole debate that is being played out now?
Mike, I don't know any professional organization, no matter how radical, no matter its position on therapy, that believes same-sex sexuality is innate or transgender identity is innate. And the people who want to take away the choice of their fellow citizens who have same-sex experiences or gender congruent experiences are insisting on a viewpoint that it is innate, and therefore any attempt to change it is impossible and harmful. So that is ideology, and it is cognitive dissonance to them to hear that it's not innate and that it commonly changes. Most people who experience same-sex sexuality experience both sex sexuality, and research has established that their attraction, or their sexual attraction, commonly changes mostly toward or to exclusively heterosexual attraction, and they should have a right to have therapy to strengthen that heterosexual side, to save their marriage and family, to live according to their faith, or for whatever reason they want without discrimination. And also the research shows that some people who are exclusively same-sex attracted, the best study, 1 in 4 exclusively lesbian women over 6 years, did change sexual attraction, and about half to a third of them to exclusive heterosexual attraction, and then about 1 in 12 to 13 exclusively same-sex attracted men also experienced change, and their changes were mostly to exclusively heterosexual. So it happens for some, even some who are exclusively same-sex attracted, and anyone should have the right to explore their options for their own sexuality and gender identity.
Thank
It's
you.
theirs, not
Thank
the
you.
government's.
Laura, I want to just ask Libby something here. You've been sitting there patiently, Libby. You are somebody for whom this is this has been a pretty life and death struggle, as I've understood you. What's your reaction in terms of this debate? And give us a perspective.
Yeah, so for those of you that could see me backstage while that was going on, I was sort of all sorts of different facial expressions as the debate went on. A few raised eyebrows, a few little sort of bit of laughter, really. I think the first thing that I find really weird about this is when I went in my sort of made that decision to leave transgenderism, I didn't make a decision to leave gender dysphoria.
Oh, okay. We'll come back there. Somebody else want to pick it up? David or
Yes.
Anne? Yes, go ahead, David.
Yes, I'm surprised actually that none of these people were challenged on the most fundamental basics to prove what they're saying. They weren't questioned, nor did they prove that homosexuality is genetically inborn.
Okay.
It's quite simple in dealing with these people, although it can be very vociferous and dramatic at the same time. The question that they need to be asked and put to the fire and not move anywhere else until they answer the question is, how do you know? How do you know it's inborn? Get them to prove what they're saying. What science? Where did you find that? For this pseudo-scientist doctor who is sitting next to you, what is the science? Okay, what have you found that out? What study are you referencing? She won't be able to do it. Or if she does, she'll be able to say something that's easily refuted in terms of research. You take the foundation of inborn theory away, and their entire issue, ideology, falls to the ground. So you heard constantly, person after person, anger after anger, kept exploding in little spots, all because you guys are operating on two different belief systems. It's inborn, then what we do is condemnable. If it's not inborn, these people or LGBT are totally wrong. In principle, it really is that simple, but not many people are dealing and requiring people to prove what they're saying. Laura gave a good example of how you do give as much proof as we've got or can have using science and anecdotal evidence. So these people come off as people of love, but without truth, there is no such thing as love. And they need to be told that, in my opinion.
Really helpful there, David. Thank you so much. As soon as Libby comes back, we'll continue with Libby. Libby, just tell us this. You were saying that you were talking about your own gender dysphoria. Just continue with what you were saying.
Yeah, sorry, that cut out a little bit. I think the app that I'm using for this.
Don't worry.
Yeah, so when I left transgenderism, I didn't have any idea in my mind that I could leave my feelings of gender incongruence behind, that gender dysphoria, that wasn't really anything that I was too bothered about. I was more focused on living for God and just, you know, I'd read my Bible, like that guy in the clip we just watched said, you know, I read my Bible and I'd actually come to a conclusion that was very different from what I'd grown up being taught. And the conclusion that I'd come to, considering all of what the Bible says and the faith that I have in God rather than in what the world says, I realized that I had to not fit in, because fitting in a small town with its own drag club and its own pride parade where I live, is being gay, is being transgender, being straight, cisgender and Christian is the thing that's not the norm in this town. That's the thing that's radically different.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Great.
for me, it wasn't about changing. It was literally about just changing the way that I lived. It wasn't about being happy that way. That's just a really fortunate thing, that the things that make me happy are just the time I spend in prayer and the time I spend with the Lord, rather than anything sexual or gender related. I'm not particularly happy about wearing a dress or wearing trousers. That's not what fulfills me in life.
Okay, Libby, I'm sure some of the others may want to ask you some questions in a minute, but Karis, I wanted to ask you, referring to what Emily said in the podcast, she brought in Professor Michael King, and I just wondered if you could say anything about the role that he's being called to play in this podcast. What do you think that's all about?
Well, I think he was brought in as an expert on history and to talk about aversion therapy or aversion technique. But of course, that's something that was taken up by some behaviorists in psychiatry in the 1960s. This business of using, electroshock and exposing patients to pornography and making them feel sick and so on. And that happened for about 10 years in the UK. It had nothing to do with psychotherapy, nothing to do with Christian or pastoral care or that of any other faith. But it's also more important even to look at what both Emily Sargent and Michael King and just about everybody else who wants a therapy ban deliberately ignores, which is the evidence of the Wolfenden committee hearings. Now, as you know, I've gone through the transcripts of what the mental health professionals said to the Wolfenden Committee on Homosexuality.
Just clarify what Wolfenden was. This is about the decriminalisation.
The was convened by the Home Office of the UK in 1956 to look at homosexual offences and prostitution. And the reason was that the Soviet Union had been found to be targeting homosexual men, especially in the government, trying to blackmail them, turning some to be double agents. And there was a fear about infiltration and a paranoia about that. But it became, all sorts of people gave evidence from the criminal justice system and so on. But there were also all the mental health professionals involved, therapists and psychiatrists, who actually saw not just patients, but also clients who came of their own accord. Just the kind of regular clients that you would have today. And they gave evidence, and it is evident from the transcripts that they talked about change and how their clients would see a change in away from same-sex attraction. And that's public evidence that the government is aware of and is ignoring today. And people like Michael King, who purportedly has looked into the history, they would know very well about this, they're just deliberately ignoring it. The same with Jane Ozanne, the same with Sargent, every single journalist. They deliberately ignore it. I've spoken about this publicly at the launch of IFTCC, and I know that the journalists heard me do that. So that's a form of self-censorship. And it's extremely important because this talking therapy was mainstream. Change-allowing therapy was mainstream, wasn't any single modality, and was sought out voluntarily. It wasn't very widely available outside London or Edinburgh, actually. became more widely available much later when counselling and therapy became more mainstream in UK society. And I think that one of the reasons that some people referred themselves as psychiatric patients or went through their doctor in the 60s and early 70s for these more crazy behaviorist aversion treatment is that they were not finding therapists. I can't prove that statement, but it is just possible, because not everybody who went for these behaviorist type treatments was somebody sent by the courts. Because what you've got to understand is that the courts would send people who'd been caught and found guilty of homosexual offences under the law of that time, and they might be sent to various mental health professionals.
So, Karis,
it's a very complicated picture. We're not getting that picture from those who want to ban.
Folks, I guess thank you very much for what you're saying there, Karis. There's a great deal of information there that I think, we do well to pay attention to. But here's my point. Michael King is introduced as being, a senior person from the Royal College of Psychiatrists. And he is introduced as a scientist. Emily says such things as, Michael King is everything that I expect an academic to be. He's wise, he's this and this and this and this. So we set the stage here now for the authoritative view. And the fact that Michael King is a gay activist, has been the chairman of the special interest group of the Royal College of Psychiatrists for years, is just left out of the picture entirely. What we have to take from this is that this is a scientist who's completely neutral and completely balanced in his point of view. And I would have concerns about that. David, do you want to say anything further? We're coming to the end of our time here, but I want to give you an opportunity.
Yes, in an effort, thank you, in an effort to just quickly know how to deal with, I forgot the woman panelist's name, Dr.
Jane Ozanne.
Dr. Jane. She was insistent that she talked to so many people who've gone through therapy. What the question for her is, and for anyone in this position, is what experts in therapy techniques have you talked with, and about their case histories? Who have you done that? I would guess very much that she's only cherry-picked research. I would guess very much that she's talked about all the people who've experienced horror stories and never bothered, which you can check out when you interview with anyone like this, which I highly suggest that be done immediately, is what experts in therapy techniques who claim change have you discussed this with? She probably won't be able to name anyone. And therefore, you can tell her then, with all due respect, this is not science that you're depending upon. So that betrays her, quote, scientific mentality.
I hear what you're saying, David, but I just want to throw this in, that for the last, 15, maybe even 20 years, there has been a de facto ban in this country because of the Memorandum of Understanding. Okay, I know that came around 2014, but increasingly, mental health bodies have forbidden anybody who has a contrary point of view from even doing the training. There's a complete shutdown. I mean, this is not answering what you're saying, but I think it's one of the frustrations in terms of finding the professionals in this country who can talk about this.
Indeed. So turn to America, who is the mainstay, originally at least, of all these issues. And so what American experts has she talked to? It's a simple question. She probably won't be able to answer it. And so you can help the public see, to help you battle, that she's really not an expert, that she really doesn't know what she's talking about. She's extraordinarily biased. And so the proof is in the pudding so much. So just ask her, have you accessed any one of the experts in America? You can give her my phone number, name, email, anytime. I'm happy to discuss with her in a very congenial, scientific manner, supportive of both sides and the feelings of both sides. But the key is to go to the roots of where these people live and breathe, so to speak, and question scientifically what they're telling you.
I think what you're saying is really important from this point of view, David, that therapists like Carol, who are being attacked, and there have been several in this country, probably more than we know about, where do they go? Who do they associate with? Because they become pariahs in a society that has sold out on one ideological point of view. So, I mean, I think it's good news that there are people all over the world who do not believe what is happening here. And increasingly, maybe it's really important to join hands and to be with others who can be supportive in this circumstance. I want to ask a quick input from Anne, and then I'm going to ask Laura to summarize where we're at the end of this program. How about that, Laura? Get going, get ready. Anne, what do you think? Any point you want to make?
Well, as I listen, this is a whole issue of values and a whole ideology of a new religion. Basically, it's a religion that opposes anything Christian, any Christian dogma that would say a man and a woman, and that kind of marriage. And so it's a way to vilify those who don't agree. And, you know, we've had war that way going on for 60 years. And that is exactly what you see happening when you listen to the audience and the anger, the absolute anger that they would be challenged, anyone would be challenged on that ideology with fact. And, you know, it would be a wonderful day if the American Psychological Association, the Canadian Psychological Association would actually retract the lie for 60 years, because it is a lie. And now the new research of fluidity exposes that lie, but no one's going to believe it because the propaganda that has happened throughout the culture for all these years has actually changed the minds of individuals. And that is a sad place to be.
Okay.
I agree with Anne. I think that's a very strong statement about the ideology. And I think what we're seeing is subgroups among people who have same-sex or gender incongruent experiences. And that the experiences of some are being taken to be the experiences of all. And so we have different people in silos not speaking to one another. We're not trying to silence them. They're trying to silence others who disagree with them. And so the silos go on. This is happening in the mental health professional organizations. I've watched it happen. I was present when a gay activist went to a board and convinced them to take steps to ban therapy. The members of the board did not know the difference, some of them, between sexual attraction and gender identity. These were not experts. In fact, they sat around and said to each other, we don't know anything about this. You're gay, you must be an expert. And he didn't present any science. So it is an ideological movement. And we have people in silos and not hearing one another's experiences. I hope the United Kingdom will allow the experiences of all citizens to count, and everyone to be able to have the choice about their own sexuality and gender. They, not the government, should decide the direction of their experiences.
Thank you so much, Laura. My guests this evening, or our guests this evening, have been Libby Littlewood, Dr. Karis Mosley, David Pickup, Dr. Anne Gillies. You've done a great job. Thank you very much. You've taken us further on. So in closing tonight, folks, if you're interested in following the podcast that Emily Sargent is putting out via the Times and the Times Magazine, then go to the podcast Story of Our Time And tomorrow, I believe, midnight tonight, the next episode will be out. And we'll be here, all being well, next Thursday with more experts and people with different points of view who want to analyze and pay careful attention to what she has been saying. So thanks again for coming, and God bless you and keep you.